Hello, welcome to Spell Day. We're covering a spell every single day of the year from the 5e PHB +3. Those +3 spells are homebrew spells. We're at +2 at the moment. You can head back and playlist to find them. And today's spell is Sunbeam.
I am bulletproof!
6th level evocation, casting time of 1 action, range of self, 60-foot line, components verbal somatic material, a magnifying glass, duration concentration up to 1 minute. A beam of brilliant light flashes out from your hand in a 5-foot wide, 60-foot long line. Each creature in the line must make a constitution saving throw. On a failed save, a creature takes 68 radiant damage and is blinded until your next turn. On a successful save, it takes half as much damage and isn't blinded by this spell. Undead and oozes have disadvantage on this saving throw. You can create a new line of radiance as your action on any turn until the spell ends. For the duration, a mote of brilliant radiance shines in your hands. It sheds bright light in a 30-foot radius and dim light for an additional 30 feet. The light counts as sunlight. Ooh. See there, now we have a spell that actually says it's sunlight. Undead and oozes. So first we have the divinity aspect of it, and the divine light and the sunlight little clause there. That's for, attacking undead. Divine wrath of the sun just kills them. When it comes to oozes, that's just melting, I guess? Evaporating? Just trying to think of why they have disadvantage. But virtually, this is 68 every turn. Yes, it takes up your concentration and your action each time you want to use it, but not continuously like Witch Bolt. You can take a turn where you cast a different spell, and you still have this going on in the background that you can use on a later action. 68 radiant damage on top of blinding until the start of your turn, not the end of an enemy's turn, not a save so the enemy can save out of the blindness. There is no save for it, it's just until the start of your next turn, which means if you can just keep hitting them with this beam, you could theoretically have someone just keep them blinded. Because that's nasty. Like, 68 is not that bad for one spell over a minute, especially, again, with any of these spells that have damage over time. If you can have a target stay in the same spot and not be able to leave, I mean, just flood them with 68. But the sunlight clause as well, because that's around you. The light that's emanating from your hands counts as sunlight, not necessarily the beam. But that's still a 30-foot radius of bright light, then dim light, 1 to light up an area, and then 2 for any undead that are sensitive to sunlight being around you. That is not bad. That's not bad at all, especially because, again, it's not tied to the beam. It's tied to the spell, but not the beam, so when you cast this, even if you're not using it for the beam aspect of it, or not using that every turn, you still have a radius of sunlight that is debuffing some undead targets around you for the minute. Well, not the most applicable, I mean, it looks cool. Speaking of that aspect, of the looking cool, this is the classic just big beam. Big, from my hands, magical glowing beam that's firing towards you. Though unlike some area effect spells, this is less an area effect and more like the later spells in some of the other expansion books, which are investitures of some of the elements, of allowing you to then do something on your action alongside an additional buff. The buff for this case being the divine light around you, or not, the sunlight around you, and then the action just being the beam. Because it doesn't have a material component that's a cost or consumed attached to it, I mean, it's a magnifying glass, which, I mean, come on. We've had magnets, we've had a penny for your thoughts, now we just have a giant beam of sunlight being a magnifying glass. Not to mention it's not a single target, which I know seems obvious, but having a multi-target, technically area, even though it's a lion spell, that you can then move as well by moving yourself, to then make sure you try and line up as many creatures as possible each turn. There's a lot of opportunities for spreading damage around and the blindness effect. That's just baked into this. If they fail to save, they've taken 68 radiant damage, and then also blinded, and not tied to their own save. It's just tied till the start of your turn. So everyone else in between, all your allies, can benefit from that blindness before your turn. 6th level might feel a little steep. I think it's appropriate, and if it was to go down, maybe 5th, but I think 6th is appropriate for not having a cost tied to the material component, and the sunlight baked into it. 7 out of 10. The only real thing, you're fighting for concentration, is namely the big downside with this. But especially if you're fighting against undead or oozes, or just anything that doesn't like radiant damage, or being blind, it's the blind effect being thrown into this on well, because that's still a benefit against things like bandits, monsters, anything that can take the blind condition. Even if you're not fighting undead or oozes, that's just a benefit. Same thing with the sunlight. A benefit on top of the blinding effect, and the damage, and you don't have to use this each round like Witch Bolt. 7 out of 10. It's pretty good.